Well, hello, everyone. My name is McKenzie Kane with the National Sports Media Association, joined by the 2023 Florida Sportswriter of the Year, Rick Stroud. Mr. Stroud, thank you for speaking with me today.
It's great to be with you as always, Mackenzie.
So, can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
It's great to be with you, Mackenzie, as always.
So I think there might be something wrong with my audio. Let's see. All right, I might have to go to my backup plan. All right, just give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Well, there we go. That's a little bit better. Now, not only are you the National Sports Media Association's Florida Sportswriter of the Year, but you are also my next door neighbor.
It's awesome. I mean, we couldn't have planned it any better if we wanted to, but no, this is great. I'm thrilled that you get to share this with me, and as a matter of fact.
We have to seize this opportunity.
Absolutely.
Now, if you just wouldn't mind starting off with a little introduction, can you walk me through what you're currently doing in the world of sports broadcast?
Well, I do a lot of things, actually. My main job is to be a beat writer covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the Tampa Bay Times, which I've done far too long, going back to 1990. So that's my main profession. But from that, there's so many opportunities in media, like you know. And so I have a weekly podcast Monday through Friday. I've hosted morning radio in the past for 5 years locally. I do television, do a lot of national guest appearances on Dan Patrick and different things. Of course, when Tom Brady was here, that was very frequent. So yeah, it's sort of like your business, right? Our business, in that the more you can do, the more opportunities there are, chances to make money, and really just kind of brand yourself in your work.
Now, this is actually your first time winning this title with the National
It is.
Sports Media Association.
It is.
Can you just walk me through what it feels like to have been selected by other sports writers in the area?
Well, I'm not sure of the nomination process, but I would imagine like it's my time. I guess maybe it's a lifetime achievement award. I don't know. I've been at this a while. A lot of my colleagues have won, and I've been very proud of them. I think Mark Tompkin from our paper has won before. So yeah, it was a great honor. It was surprising. I didn't know the process, and I think any time that your colleagues are the ones that vote for you, that it means just a little bit more. And again, longevity has its reward, I guess. But I do know an awful lot of guys, and a lot of guys have moved on from this career, either to do something else or retired. So I'm still out there banging it. So it was nice and a great surprise, and I'm very honored, especially when you see the list of past winners and the people that we're going to be with, for the awards program.
I'm going to just go ahead and move this on the other side because I want to be able to at least
Right.
look at you the
Sure.
whole time.
No problem.
That's one thing I've sort of learned about the reporting industry. It's all about relationships and still
Absolutely.
developing
Eye contact, yeah.
Well, can you just walk me through that moment in your lifetime when you realized sports writing was the route you wanted to take long term?
I thought about that, and it's kind of strange. I don't know that there was a singular moment, really. I grew up in St. Petersburg. This is my hometown. It's very unusual to come back and work in your hometown, and it's really where I've been working my entire career. But I was fortunate in growing up here. The St. Petersburg Times, now the Tampa Bay Times, was a terrific newspaper, and it was one that was, nationally honored and one of the largest, if not the largest, in the state of Florida. So I grew up reading a lot of great sports writers. You remember Mizell was a columnist here, Shelby Strother, that people would know from Detroit as well. And so I was just always somebody that was interested in journalism in particular, whether it was news or sports, of course. And I was an athlete. So I played a lot of baseball, mostly baseball my entire career, went to college, played at Arkansas State, which you can see one of the helmets back there from my alma mater. So it was an easy sort of transition, and some things that I loved, being able to combine the two, the love of sports and the love of writing and journalism. Majored in that in college, and was the sports editor of my college newspaper. Did all those things, right, that you do coming up, and it was just kind of a sort of a simple transition. And I feel like I haven't. I mean, I've worked hard, but it is not as hard labor as some. I remember my dad worked for the power company, so he was out in the heat in Florida every day. I had a couple summers where I was out there digging ditches, putting in power lines, and so I know that there's another world out there too. So to be able to go to big events, go to sporting events, and then write about it, meet these unbelievable athletes and coaches, I've been blessed. And it was really not a eureka moment, just that I kind of knew coming out of high school what I wanted to major in.
And how would you say, since that moment when you became a Bucks beat reporter, that you've progressed since then?
Well, when you're in this business, you learn a lot, and it's either survive or die. And so I didn't just start off covering the Buccaneers. And this was a newspaper where people were coming from all over the country to hire and do those jobs. And so I think this was a good thing in retrospect. I know I was impatient at the time, but I began covering high schools, and so, it started in Clearwater, and I had Northern Pinellas and all that. I was my own sports editor in a regional edition. We would also write for the main section, and they would send me some college games and things here or there, or a sidebar at the Bucks. And when I began, we didn't have the Tampa Bay Rays. We didn't have the Tampa Bay Lightning. So that was the big game in town. And so I was able to progress. I spent 5 years in bureaus knocking it around, but I was able to think analytically, plan my own section, do all that stuff every day. And then my big break came when they brought me downtown to cover the University of Florida. And so I was a Gators beat writer for a couple of years. Those were unbelievable years where a lot of stuff was going on. We wrote stories that led to investigations of the basketball team, the football team. Norm Sloan was fired. Like, all this was happening. Did that for 2 years, and then an opportunity to cover the Bucks came up. And like I said, that was our major team. It still is to some extent. The NFL is still king. And so I was fortunate to be asked to do it.
Now, you mentioned you covered both professional and started out with high school and college sports. What are some of the similarities or even just the big differences you see between the varying levels of profession?
Well, it's changed, as we know, as we're living in a world now of NIL and players actually getting paid, and legally in this instance. I wrote stories where they were getting paid illegally, and there were therefore a lot of sanctions. But I always, I struggled covering college sports from this standpoint, and when I did it, was that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and yet while players were getting scholarships and things like that, and they had a lot that these colleges offered them, I was an athlete, and I know how many hours I worked each week just doing sports, and then having to go to college and make grades. All of that was tough. So there's a control element with colleges that you have to request the athletes. You don't, a quarterback could potentially throw the game-losing interception. You may not talk to him. I found that difficult. I saw some hypocrisy in that, and that aspect of it bothered me. The other thing that bothered me a little bit about college athletics, because I saw that there were people making a lot of money doing it, was when the 18-year-old point guard misses a free throw with no time on the clock, and then you have a lot of grown people very upset at that kid who, for all the world, feels as bad as he could, and yet he has to hear it, in terms of the boos. And it just, I don't know. I just thought that when I went and covered the NFL, we're all professionals. We all know why we're there. We know it's not show friends, it's show business. There's no sort of like student athlete. He's a student when you want him to be a student. He's an athlete when you want him to be an athlete. And so I just found it a much easier relationship. And the players at that time when I started were about my age. Now I'm covering some of their children, but it just seemed like a more relatable and also access, because I think good journalism is really about access. And so the more you can have access to the players, the coaches, I think the better job you can do.
I've never heard that line. Oh, I muted myself. I had never heard that line before. It's not show friends, it's show business.
Yeah,
I
that's
have
exactly
to add
right.
that to my everyday vocabulary.
I use it all the time, and it's true. I mean, I think we get caught up sometimes in that, but this is big business, and that's what you're covering.
Now, Tampa Bay, it's a large sports city, and it's had its ups and downs throughout the years.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You've covered both the ups and the downs.
A lot of downs, yes.
Can you just walk me through, from bottom of the division to Super Bowl champions, how the success of the team correlates to what you're writing.
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and you don't get to choose necessarily, the outcomes, and that's part of journalism, right? If you cover politics, you don't know what's going to happen. Every day is a different day, and it's similar in sports. I always said this, that there is as many good stories during a losing season as there is a winning one. Now, there may not be as many people interested in those stories, and certainly when you have a Tom Brady or you're winning Super Bowls, there's a lot of eyeballs on your work. And so from that standpoint, it's different, right? But in general, I thought it was interesting because, we had coaching changes almost every 2 years. There's one period we had 5 coaches in 10 seasons. And every time that happens, I got to learn a lot about those men, but also about organizations and ownership and so many things. And they went through a situation in Tampa Bay where the Bucs were going to move after the owner died, and they left it to a trust and they sold it to Malcolm Glazer. They needed a stadium, and there was a big political issue. So, there's a lot of things that come with professional sports. Sometimes it's politics. Players get in trouble. You have to be very fast on your feet and understand public records and cops and things that happen in everybody's lives. And so from that standpoint, even though they weren't winning, there were some really good stories. And each time they changed coaches, you had whole new staffs. And unfortunately, in the NFL, if you get in a spiral of change the coach, change the quarterback, you lose, and that's what they did for years. But when it turned, it was wild. This community that had been starved for something, finally in 2002, the year after they fired Tony Dungy, who had essentially built this team, John Gruden came in his first year, beat the Raiders, the big win in Philadelphia in the championship game where they'd always lost, and this whole franchise, the view of it externally and internally, I think, changed. And since then, they went through about 12 years where they didn't make the playoffs. They had 2 winning seasons, a lot of coaches. And then, of course, the GOAT shows up. And that was probably the most unexpected thing that's happened on the beat. And they went and won Super Bowl, of course, in his first year.
And as you know, we are diehard New England fans.
Absolutely.
We moved
I
down to
understand.
Tampa. We like to think that, Brady wanted
He followed
to follow.
you. Yeah. Naturally. And Tom is terrific. I didn't coin that phrase, but he is, I would say this about him, and people in New England know this probably better even than in Tampa, because he was only here for 3 years. We thought he was going to be here for 2, and then he unretired, as you know. But for a superstar, and I mean that transcends just the sport of football, obviously, when you're with him, and of course we had also the unfortunate, it's the most Tampa thing ever, he was here during COVID, when literally I covered the team and Tom Brady the first year without ever having been in the room with him. We were doing Zoom calls from where we're at right now in my upstairs loft here, with a Zoom call with Tom Brady and every other player and coach for the entire year. We would go to practice, rush home, do all our interviews on Zoom, and that's how we covered the season. And when we would go to games, we wouldn't go down to the locker room. They weren't allowed to, so they'd Zoom interviews up to us in the press box. But in meeting him, and I did finally obviously get to sit down with him and talk to him, just his parents have done such a great job with all that he's had, all the celebrity and everything that he's had to deal with. He is present. He doesn't have his cell phone out. He gives great answers, and I just wish, we could have done more of those, but he has so much going on that it's difficult to kind of nail him down. But it was, that was an interesting time, to say the least, and it went by like Haley's comment. It was fast and it was bright and then it was gone. But it was really really interesting to see Tampa Bay be born. And about the same time, as you know, the Lightning won the Stanley Cup twice. The Rays went to the World Series. I mean, that's all Tom Brady, right? I mean, that was all him.
It's the GOAT effect.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm curious. Oh gosh, I completely lost my train of thought. But with Tom, and just the fact that I think a lot of fans sometimes think media always knows the stories first. They always know what's going to happen before it even happens. Is that true? Did you have any hunch that Brady was ever going to unretire?
Well, no, I really didn't. In fact, in this very room, I had been assigned, which is weird, in the off season. Sometimes I do other things besides the Tampa Bay Bucks. there was an SEC men's basketball tournament at Emily Arena, and I had been assigned the championship game. Okay, which I went and gladly did because I love men's basketball. I came back. My daughter was out front with a hockey stick. She wanted to hit the hockey puck back and forth in the driveway, which we did. And I came up here to do a podcast, and I looked at my phone, and there was Brady's text saying he's coming back. And I thought, because these days in social media, what are you really looking at, right? That little blue check mark, you better make sure it's the right one. And so I was blown out. What is this? And then I screamed, and I went, oh my God. And they could hear me from outside. And, he had decided to return. In retrospect, it didn't surprise me because he had played so well. Even the year after the Super Bowl, they lost in the divisional title game against the Rams, should have won. Gave up a touchdown or a field goal in the last seconds and end up losing to the Rams, or they would have been in the championship game at home against the 49ers, which I assure you they would have beaten. And so, I think he realized he still had more meat on the bone. He's the ultimate competitor. Now, unfortunately for him, he went 8-9 and became divorced, and we know all the things that befall him after that. But it was remarkable and unexpected and all those things. I mean, they were basically running, ESPN, everybody, sort of a eulogy of his career, that it was over. And in fact, it wasn't. And so they had to go back through that again a second time, the last time he retired.
So what's the process look like for finding these stories? I know we're in the off season right now, but how does it change? How do you find this information?
Well, I think, we're in a relationship business, and I think people, and this, McKenzie, people do business with people they like. And I think it's not necessarily about, I like this person, so I'm going to give them stories. I think that you have to be a couple things. You have to be fair, and you have to try. Not everybody gets this right, and I certainly haven't all the time, but you have to try to be accurate. Accuracy really matters, and you can't have agendas, right? You can't be like, I'm going to get that coach, or I'm going to get that player. I think you just, there is a universe in every beat, whether you're talking about news or sports, there's a universe that you need to learn of language, how to speak football, so to speak, all those things. And it's about relationships. It's about building those when you're not just coming to people for information. If you only call the general manager when there's a crisis or a player cut or something like that, that's not really a relationship. That's transactional. Once in a while, you just have to say, how's the wife and kids, and actually, try to develop on the road, wherever it is, have a beer, do something to where you find common ground. I mean, at the end of the day, they're in a high pressure business and millions of dollars are at stake, but they're also fathers and husbands, and there's relatable things to all of us. And so I think, the more you can develop those relationships and kind of attack it as if you really, don't be the guy that knows everything. You're really working on behalf of the consumers, which are people that are fans of the team that you cover or have an interest in football, and you have the access. You can go in the locker room. You can go over to One Buck Place. You can take them into the general manager's office or the coach's office and sit down and have those one-on-ones. What would they want you to ask if they were there? And kind of approach it from that standpoint. So I think that the key is people and being the most consistent person you can be. Look, there are bad times, and I've written some stuff that the Bucks were not fond of, and Antonio Brown being one of those stories. He wound up getting suspended with 2 other players for the rest of the year. They didn't want that story at all, and it was true, and they knew why I had to do it. We got past it, but for a while it was not good. There wasn't a lot of back and forth after that. Those are things you're just going to have to endure, but you have to be fair. And I was in that instance, gave them all kinds of opportunity about 2 weeks before we published to respond to it. And you have to be accurate. And if you can be those 2 things and also try to be somebody that is just relatable and not always, be the reporter, but just, be the neighbor, be the acquaintance, whatever. You're not going to be best friends. You're not going to go and hang out with these guys necessarily. There's always going to be that distance. But you can respect each other's profession. I think that's the key.
Now, I always like, for my own benefit, to know what are some of the biggest rookie mistakes you see for young people in the industry, or frankly for anyone in the industry, so just so I
Yeah.
don't make the same mistakes when I get there.
Well, you don't make any mistakes, McKenzie, but I think one of the mistakes I've seen others make when they come to this business, and understand too that by the time most of the people are in the NFL, covering an NFL team, they've done a lot of things, so they've kind of gone through those experiences. But one I would say is just, simply don't try to impart on the people you're covering how much you know. I think it'll be obvious when, like I said, there's a universe of stuff out there you need to learn. But if you attack it in a way that you're really, sort of the voice of the fan in essence, or the voice of your reader, or the voice of your viewer if you're in TV, or listener if you're in radio. So what they want is information, right? And so the best way to get it is not to attack it and say, well, coach, when you ran, when you're in cover 2 and then you rotated out of that, and then you went with a 3-man front and you're running press man on the outside, and then the linebacker came down in the A gap. Nobody knows what that means. I mean, yeah, if people want that, there are websites for that, right? But just what happened on that, last second 45-yard touchdown pass you gave up to lose the game? It can be very simple. And I do think that people try to, get a little in the weeds, but just remember who your audience is. You're not there necessarily to impress. It'll come through, and you want to have the knowledge. You want to be able to say those things, but you also want to approach it in a fan-friendly way so that, you're representing your readers or your listeners or your viewers. And so what would they want to know? Get the information, ask the question concisely. I've known people, McKenzie, that they start to ask a question, even at our level, and we don't know if they're going to get to one, but at 20 or 30 seconds later, it arrives sometimes. And that's not the way, you want to be prepared. You want to do your homework, and you want to be concise. And then, ask the open-ended questions, which I'm sure everybody learns, in college, that, don't go in there with a theory and try to get them to confirm it, but see what they think. And that's really the key.
Now, I mean, you mentioned know your audience, know your fans, your listeners, your viewers. You have all of them in all your different mediums. You've got readers, listeners. So can you just tell me how your approach to covering sports differs, and if at all, from when you're on TV versus radio versus writing?
Well, it's a great question. I think that it does change, right? Because writing is at times, a little less so now, a longer form medium where the reader has time, or is going to invest some time in actually reading something. So you're not hurried in terms of your presentation always, although you want to get the nut graph up there soon. Don't bury the news. But at the end of the day, it's different than, say, when I do TV once a week or whatever. I might have 4 questions, and I've got about 2 minutes or 90 seconds for each question. So I've got to be really concise and economic with my words and all of those things. It's not a time for, flowery language and stuff. And then, in radio, it just depends. You do have a clock there too, but it's a little more relaxed medium. And even though the average person listens about 7 or 8 minutes in their car a day, that's another thing you have to keep in mind, is that it's just you and them. Generally people don't listen to radio with a bunch of people with them, unless it's music. So, you want to develop that relationship, and it usually takes time. They have to keep coming back, but you have to be entertaining and informative, which is different than, obviously, sometimes than just writing some news story.
Now, I mean, my last question before I let you go, because I've kept you here for a little while.
No, you're good.
I fear that sometimes with my generation, writing's a little bit of a dying art. We aren't practicing it enough, and language is constantly getting shorter.
Yes.
What advice do you have to aspiring young sports writers on how to practice, how to stand out, and just grow their skills in the craft?
Well, what I would say is, I don't know that. I think we're in a time of change, certainly, especially in my business. people consume information differently, generally online. Certainly they're not taking what you're throwing in a driveway anymore, nor should they necessarily. But I still think that, and it's a busy space, right? I think sometimes we can get lumped in with bad apples because everybody can start a website and everybody can have a blog and everybody can say anything they want. And so we're in this sort of, and it's not just sports, it's politics as well, this struggle for what is real, what is truth, all that stuff. So it's a great question that we struggle in our industry with every day. All I can tell you is that, our training as journalists, if you come to this business with that, if you stick to those core values of getting it right, writing the truth, and not just your truth, that will stand out. News still sells above all else. People want news, but they don't want fake news, as they call it. They really want to be able to get the facts and decide. And if you're consistent and you're the person that establishes themselves as a credible source, as where I have to go, if you're reading about the Buccaneers or you're consuming information about them, I want them to say, hey, I'm going to Rick Stroud because that guy knows what he's talking about. And it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen maybe in a year, but over time, that consistency will win out. So be consistent, be accurate, and be fair. And if you don't have agendas, and you're just, doing your job, people will respect that, and that your work will shine through. And I don't care if that's 10 years from now, 100 years from now, that's still going to be the case. People will stand out as long as your information is good.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, we could do this all the time. We don't have to wait for me to win an award. I'll have to win it every year now.
We've got the professional
Just
equipment.
come over every night. Yeah, let's do this.
We'll start our own podcast.
Perfect.
Well, nevertheless, congratulations
Thank
on the
you very
title.
much.
Look forward to
Very honored.
seeing you at the award ceremony.
Absolutely.